Stand by. We're going live. We're going live. 10, 9, going live. 7, 6, 5, going live. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to Season 2 of 10 Seconds to Air. I'm Alita Guillen. So before we get started with today's episode, I want to tell you a bit about what's to come in Season 2. I will interview interesting guests who communicate fearlessly. Communication is the most important skill that we have. We use it constantly. It's how we connect at work and at home. Doing it effectively makes us successful at work and brings us harmony in our social life. I mean, it makes sense. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time getting too preachy with you here. I'll be sending out a regular newsletter in the coming weeks. I'll have more on that in the show notes. So let's jump into Season 2 now. Today, I'm talking to Matt Littman. He is the executive director of 97%, a nonpartisan group that is aiming to bring common sense to the gun ownership conversation. Matt has spent more than 2 decades as a political strategist and government affairs advisor. He is a frequent guest on CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, the BBC, and now 10 Seconds to Air. Matt has an exceptional ability to communicate difficult ideas effectively. He's a master at bringing people together on issues they may not agree on, and he is here today. Matt, thank you.
Thank you, Alita. Thanks for having me on.
I see you wrestling the dog there. I'm going to let everyone know right now that we have a huge golden doodle and a Cavachon dog in the room, and you've got one hand on him, holding him down. So we're going to try to do this even with the dog,
very cute.
With the dog entertaining us.
Yeah.
You've been quite busy lately.
Yeah.
Fortunately and unfortunately, because this gun issue has been out of control.
Yeah.
More than 60 or 70 mass shootings so far this year. We're only in February.
And people say when they see me on TV, they know it's bad news.
Oh.
Yeah. Right.
Wow. Well, you are on TV a lot, which brings me to our first question. You've got a tough topic that you have to pull together to communicate well. What goes through your mind 10 seconds before you go on air?
First thing I think to myself is don't curse.
Okay. You can do that here.
I can do that here, so don't say fuck. That's what I say to myself, really, before I go on air, because I know I might, because I kind of want to, and I know I'll never go back on if I do. Number one. Number two, don't be funny. So I'm always
because
tempted,
it's a serious issue?
Yes, and I'm tempted to be a wise guy sometimes, don't be funny, and that helps me be funny at the appropriate moment.
Okay.
If I say don't be funny. Then the last thing is, there are always two or three things you want to say no matter what the questions are when you're on air. So when you do one of these CNN type interviews, you have like 5 minutes maybe. No matter what the question is, there are things that I want to get out. There are 3 answers that I want to get out. So no matter what they ask me, I'm going to answer in that way. And it's hard for them to get mad at me because we're out of time.
Yeah.
So that's what I think to myself every time before I go on air.
Yeah. And what about now with the gun issue? You've got people on both sides who feel pretty strongly. You're now working with 97%. Explain 97%.
So the way that this came about was we all recognize that there's a terrible problem in this country, more than 45,000 deaths with a gun a year. The vast majority of the country is in a certain place, yet the basic things that you and I and your audience would think would get done on gun issues is not getting done. So we call ourselves 97% because in a survey, that's the number that favor universal background checks, which we do not have. Now, how could it possibly be that 97% of the country favors something and we don't have it, right? I mean, it seems there is no other issue that has such widespread agreement. So when we went into this, we didn't know what we could do. It took us like a year of meeting with legislators and law enforcement and people on both sides of the issue to find out what's working and what's not. And if anything, is there anything that we could do differently? And so we did after that time. We heard from, do you remember Chief Bill Bratton, the police chief, one of the great police chiefs of Los Angeles, New York,
was
and
in
Boston
at one time,
That's right. And Bratton said that he thinks that gun owners are mostly in the same place as non-gun owners, but he can't prove it. But he believes that they favor gun reforms. Mm-hmm. And no one is speaking to them. That kind of silent majority of people.
Okay, interesting.
Do that. And so that's basically what happened. So we did. And so we went about it by doing research to find out, to make sure that we're all in the same place.
Pause for 1 second. I'm going to let this dog out.
Okay.
All right, dog. You're not invited anymore. Out. Bye. All right, let's pick up right where we left off with Bratton. So he believes that people are closer together than...
That's right. And that no one is speaking for them. So we first set out to prove that that was true. So we hired a firm, did research on it. We did focus groups of like 7 female hunters in Florida and 10 members of law enforcement in Wisconsin. So we went into swing states, surveyed gun owners, did focus groups of gun owners, and found out that basically this is true. Like, for example, 2/3 of NRA members favor universal background checks, right? Most people just wouldn't realize that, wouldn't think that's true. And that gave us the impetus to get started. And what you find out when you start in this field is that there are already dozens and dozens of groups working in this issue in different ways. Yeah. 85 gun reform organizations, dozens of gun rights organizations. Folks know the NRA, but there are groups that are to the right of the NRA that are very effective that folks don't know about, right? And so you don't want to be doing the same thing as everybody else. The other thing is you also want to have good relationships, because if you don't have good relationships, they'll say, don't listen to that guy, right? So it's a very tricky line to walk when we started, and we've managed it in the 2.5 years since we started.
So if there are so many groups out there, what makes this one different?
Right. So because our focus is where gun owners and non-gun owners agree.
So none of the other groups are focused on both sides.
Correct. So what you have with many of these groups, and they're effective in their own way. So Everytown and Giffords, for example, do work with gun owners, but it's not their primary purpose. So I'm not going to say to your audience that gun owners believe what Everytown and Giffords are telling them, because they're mostly known for gun reform, right? So they don't have the same, we go in, this is the only thing that we do. It's not the only thing that I'm choosing my words carefully. It's not the only thing that they do. So people look at them a little bit differently than they might look at us. So we're the only one, and we're not going to be the only one. There'll be others that do what we do. Some are forming right now. That speaks to gun owners and non-gun owners together to bring people together on bipartisan solutions.
And how are you bringing them together? What are you finding is happening?
So one thing that we did was we were very deliberate about forming a bipartisan advisory board. Now, most Republicans in Congress, for example, don't want to talk about the gun issue. You know, maybe 10 out of 210 will vote for universal background checks, and they don't really want to talk about it all the time. So it's very difficult in some ways to form a bipartisan advisory board, but we did. So we got 2 former NRA lobbyists, for example, on our advisory board. They favor things like background checks and red flag laws. We have, I think, 3 former Republican members of Congress on our advisory board: Carlos Curbelo from Florida, Charlie Dent from Pennsylvania, and Joe Walsh from Illinois. Olivia Troy, who ran national security for Mike Pence, is on our advisory board. And they're on our advisory board because they believe that some groups have gone too far and something needs to be done. And so we are a pro-Second Amendment organization. We believe the Second Amendment exists. What are we going to do? 400 million guns in this country, less people than there are guns. We're not taking away people's guns. Like that's, you know, sometimes some people say, well, let's do what they did in Australia. None of that is happening.
Yeah.
Right? So what are we going to do within the world of reality to keep people safer? These Republicans join us. And can I give you one example?
Yes.
What I mean? So Olivia Troy is from El Paso, Texas. And in 2019, there was a shooting at a Walmart in El Paso, Texas, in which over 20 people were killed. Her aunt was at the Walmart in El Paso, Texas, when that happened. Somebody pulled her to safety when the person was shooting. Wow. Last week, her aunt was in the mall in El Paso, Texas, when somebody was shooting.
Get out.
And somebody pulled her to safety.
Wow.
So Olivia is indignant. And she worked even during, you know, when she was working for Mike Pence on national security, part of it was on mass shootings. And so I speak to Olivia all the time. She's writing an op-ed for us right now. Her concern is that not enough is getting done, and she speaks to gun owners all the time. And most people agree on this issue. The question is, where are gun owners? Because they're the missing piece. We know we're non-gun owners. When you say
agree on what issue? That something needs to be done? So on gun issues, something
has to be done. 45,000 deaths. Does anybody want that? No, right?
No, right.
So where do we actually agree on the issue? And I could tell you a lot of places of disagreement or where things aren't going to be that effective, and then how we could be more effective. But you know, a lot of times, like as your audience knows, a lot of political issues, people get locked into their sides, and then that's it. Yeah. And nothing happens. Right. And so we're trying to make something happen.
So when you say we're trying to make something happen and there are a lot of different issues, you got to focus on some of them. You can't focus on everything.
Great point. That's the best
So
point.
where are you focusing?
So that's the best point, because a lot of these organizations go in and they say, here are the 89 issues that we want you to support us on. And then the person who they're meeting with is like, what? I can't support you on 89 issues?
Right.
We have 3.
Okay.
Right? So we do it a little bit differently. So that's through our research. This is what we came up with. We're not trying to come in every week with a new thing. We've got this thing. This is it. This will work. So when we say that there are 45, so the audience knows there are about 26,000 suicides a year and about 19 to 20,000 homicides with a gun every year. Right?
So more people are dying by with guns by suicide.
Much more by suicide.
Okay.
So the question is, you're not going to get to zero in any of this. How do we lower this? How do we save more lives? That's the question. And then we came up with our plans to do so. So the first thing we did was we did research with a firm in New York to find out how to talk to gun owners. Okay. One thing that's interesting when you want to talk to gun owners is...
They said, bring in Matt Littman.
They said, bring in Matt Littman, which was a shock to everybody. They don't want to hear from politicians, and they don't want to hear from the media, because they feel that both of those groups speak down to them. They want to hear mostly from like law enforcement types, military. That's who they want to hear from. So we find out things like that, like saying gun safety instead of gun control, certain words that you use that turn people off immediately.
Makes sense.
Right?
Makes sense, yeah.
So then we did research with Beacon in Boston, and they work for Elizabeth Warren and they work for Fox News. And we had them poll gun owners, and not super deeply, but widely, to find out how many people favor background checks, red flag laws. And then we did that, and we presented that to, in Congress, there's something called the Gun Violence Prevention Caucus, which is about almost the entire Democratic caucus, about 170 members. And so we presented it to those members of Congress. They asked a lot of questions about the language and all that. Then the third thing that we did was research with Dr. Mike Siegel at Tufts. Dr. Mike Siegel is well known in the gun space, but before that in tobacco. So he's like the guy who said, we need to get tobacco owners to understand the problem and work with us. And the same thing is true on guns. We need gun owners.
And there was success there.
And there was success, and he's a great track record. So we brought him in to go deeper on some of these issues as to why there was agreement or disagreement. If we say 2/3 of the country favors red flag laws, is that true on every aspect of it, or are there ways to lower and raise those numbers?
And red flag laws are...
So red flag laws are, if you and your husband are fighting and you think he's dangerous and has a gun, you could petition the court to take his gun away temporarily, like for a year, right? And that's, so we have red flag laws in 19 states. They're also known as extreme risk protection orders, ERPOs. The problem with red flag laws that we have in the country right now are that the states that have them don't use them enough. People don't know that they exist. So states that have had red flag laws where a person normally would get that gun taken away, this happened, I think, in Buffalo, they don't realize that they have it and could have had the gun taken away, and we have a mass shooting situation. So this happens because often we're able to identify these people before the crime is committed because they've done something. Florida, for example, has a red flag law. They've used it over 2,000 times in about 4 years. And not in every case does it prevent a shooting, but I think the statistics are about in 1 out of every 10 cases.
So it is being used.
It's being used in 19 states. There are more than 19 states, obviously, they're not being used effectively in many states, including California, which is where we are now. They're not being used super effectively.
Okay. So we talked about, you said there are 3 focuses.
Yeah. So our thing is violent misdemeanors. So if you, very often, if you commit a felony, it gets knocked down to a misdemeanor for reasons of maybe making it easier to prosecute. If you commit any felony, you can't have a gun in this country. So that could be tax fraud. That could be anything. That could be all sorts of things. Some of those things do not make you someone more likely to commit violence with a gun. It's just the way the law is set up. If you commit a domestic violence, let's use as an example, which is often a misdemeanor, you can still get a gun. So our thing is that if you commit a violent misdemeanor, you can no longer get a gun. 80% of gun owners favor that.
Okay.
Almost 20% of homicides, we'd reduce that by almost 20% of the almost 20,000 a year if we just had a violent misdemeanor law, which is favored by gun owners. That's number 1. Number 2 is that we do the universal background checks in many states, not all. And I hate to say this, I hesitate to say this, but the federal background check system isn't super effective or used very well. And so many people feel that it would be more effective to have a state background check.
Okay.
Because the state background checks get into things like violent misdemeanors, which the federal one does not. And if you do that, you need to give people a permit. For example, like why would they be getting a state background check? Our thing is that you'd get your state gun permit. So let's say you buy a gun. And then let's say next week you buy a gun. Each time you buy a gun now, you'd have to have a background check. If you have a permit, you would not.
Okay.
So there are about 100-something million gun owners and 400 million guns. So that means that there are about 4 guns to every gun owner, meaning a lot of gun owners own more than one gun, right? And so what's the point of checking somebody if they haven't committed a crime? Like between now and next Thursday, the odds are you're not going to have committed a crime. So the state permits are deeper and better for gun owners because they have to do the background checks less frequently, which could often be a pain in the butt for somebody in some rural area to have to be doing a background check all the time. Another thing that gun owners want is they want to be able to...
So stop right there for just a second. How would that help what's happening now? So if you...
Better background checks.
So better background checks at the state level.
Correct.
Deeper,
right?
But not as frequent. So you
Correct.
get a permit.
Correct.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Maybe every 5 years.
Okay.
Versus now when you'd have to be getting them every time you buy a gun.
Every time you buy a gun, which to some people may sound like, hey, that's a good thing because
it
it's
may
going to be
sound like it, but there's no. In other words, if you're getting a gun today and next Thursday and you have no history of crime, you're not doing anything wrong. And if you have a Second Amendment right to have a gun, why should you constantly have to be getting background checks every time you pick one up? But the benefit also, it could be very difficult to do. It's not that easy in some places to do these background checks. The other thing that gun owners want is they want to be able to give like a family member a gun. Okay. If your family member also has a permit, then you could do that, right? So that's another benefit for gun owners. So state background checks with the state permits. And the final thing is on red flag laws. So it's interesting. We were on Capitol Hill on Friday and Thursday meeting with House Republicans. And one of the offices said that they just met with New Jersey law enforcement. And New Jersey law enforcement was saying that they get a lot of false red flag law cases. In other words,
in New Jersey,
you're mad at your husband.
Yeah.
You don't want him to have a gun because you're just pissed or he's pissed at you. Yeah. And he petitions the court for you not to have a gun. One is we believe that the whole process needs to be faster to protect people's rights. And 2 is there needs to be a penalty if you're making a really egregious false claim. So that's it. That's the whole thing. And if you do that, according to Dr. Siegel, you reduce homicides by 28% and suicides by 6.7%.
Red flag laws.
All of it.
All 3. Say those numbers again.
28% on homicides.
Reduce 28% on homicides.
6.7% on suicides.
Okay.
That's the research. Now, there are 4 states, for example, that have misdemeanor violent crime laws that prevent you from getting a gun. So he's looking at all this research from the states, federally, and he's got the credibility. And we've met with Republicans and Democrats and gone over this whole thing. And so when we talk about reducing deaths, this is the most effective way I've seen of any way that I've seen. That's somewhere within the realm of reality. Right.
Where are you seeing the challenges that come up when you have these conversations? What are the questions that you're getting?
So first of all, meeting with House Republicans is tough because they tend to not want to talk about it, as I said before.
So even starting the conversation is tough.
So the way that this really works is
I wish people could see the look on your face right now.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, you can't
are you kidding?
No, right. You can't, any of the gun reform groups, you don't just call up and say, I want to meet with Darrell Iss's office. They're not going to want to do it.
Yeah.
So you have to, generally speaking, have, the way that lobbying works so your audience knows is Republicans meet with Republicans and Democrats meet with Democrats.
Oh, boy.
So if I'm at, for example, to take this away from gun issues for a sec, let's say I work at Google and I want to go meet with House Republicans. I have my House Republican lobbyist. And if I want to meet with House Democrats, I have my House Democrat lobbyist.
It can't be the same person.
It's not the same. It can be. I've done it.
Okay.
But generally it's not.
But you're an exception to this.
I'm a freak.
Exactly why we're talking to you.
And the same is true in the Senate. That's 4 different people.
Wow.
Right? They don't go together.
And it's because they feel otherwise
you're like a spy.
You're a spy, yeah.
So as an example, when we went with Joe Walsh on Friday, he's a former Republican congressman from Illinois. He's now an independent. In a couple of those Democratic meetings, he didn't come because we weren't sure how he'd be received necessarily. And so you go in and you have to have somebody set those meetings up. So the big gun reform organizations hire Republican lobbyists to help set up their Republican meetings. That's how it works. Mm-hmm. So when we go in, they already think you're here to bash us.
When 97% goes in,
Yeah.
they already think that.
Yeah. And
Okay.
we're here to say, and we tell them, this is what we have. And they are, so we just did this last week. People are generally very surprised when we come in because we're talking to gun owners. We're asking the questions the way that is fair. And these are the results. And what we say to them is, these are results. You're going to do what you want.
Yeah.
Right. In reality, no gun reform is passing Congress in the next year and a half. Yeah. That's just the reality. But these are the numbers. Now they'll say, it's interesting because we talked about the NRA for a second, but there are other groups, and those groups to the right of the NRA, and if these members of Congress do anything on gun issues on the Republican side, these groups will have hundreds of people call up screaming at their offices, and that surprisingly is effective.
Yeah.
This is an effective way, and so you have to be able to respond to that. Gun owners who favor gun reform need to start doing that too.
So for people who are listening or paying attention to this issue, it seems it sounds like you've got information, you've done the research, you've done your polling. It's common sense.
Right. Yes.
It's common sense.
So you're saying that, in other words, common sense, it should pass.
It's common, right?
That's not the way Congress works.
Yeah.
Right. So you could have you could say, okay, I like the American flag, and you're going to get, 42% of the votes. It doesn't matter because you have to get through the committees. Somebody's got to sponsor it. You got to get through one side, then the other side. President has to sign it. There are a million things that have to go on. So even if we're giving them the most commonsensical, if that's a term, thing, it could take years of laying the groundwork on these types of things before you're able to get it done. And that's true on any issue, no matter what the issue is. It could be the most basic thing. It could be saying, I want people to have houses. Well, I don't know. We have to change the law for that. I'm really not sure. And we go through that too. And so, what I tell people who are not used to doing this stuff, who say, oh, well, I've got this great idea, that's going to happen. No, it's not.
Yeah.
The thing that we promise people like me is that you'll be heard. We don't promise it's going to pass. We promise you'll get a hearing. People
What do you mean,
listen to
people like you? What do you say?
People like me who work on the relationship between an organization or company and elected officials.
Yeah.
I can get you heard to the people that you want to hear you.
I see what you're saying. Okay.
But I can't promise you they'll do the thing you want to do.
Right,
Now, another mistaken impression that your audience might have is that campaign contributions are the golden ticket.
Yeah.
They're not. So the way that campaign contributions work is you have things like super PACs, which could donate untold amounts of money. That may matter. But if I'm going to meet with a member of Congress and I've donated, now the maximum for a campaign is $3,300, they're not going to do what I want them to do because I donated $3,300. There are a lot of people who donate $3,300.
Yeah.
It's not that big of a deal. What you will get is I may be able to get a meeting with my member of Congress because I donated. But that doesn't mean that they're going to do the thing you want them to do.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been a part of, issues where we've done big fundraisers for the head of the Ways and Means Committee in the House, and they never did what we wanted them to do.
Yeah.
But you want to be able to get in front of them and say, this is the thing we want to do. That's what the money does get you. But if somebody is a no on the issue that you want them to vote on, they're not going to yes because you donated $3,300.
Yeah. So how do you get them to yes?
So you get them to yes by bringing them the issue and convincing them. It's, like, for example, people will say the NRA is buying off all these members of Congress. They're not. It's the NRA's membership that cares so much. The 4 million people in the NRA, they'll inundate you with phone calls and vote a certain way. That's powerful. It's not, the NRA does spend money. But let's say you, Alita, were somebody who said, I don't want any changes on guns. And the NRA then said, okay, we want to keep you in Congress. We're going to support your campaign, right? Okay, well, let's say you changed your mind. Every town is going to give you more money if you changed your mind to get you elected to Congress.
Yeah.
So that's not what it's the power of the people. It's the fact that people vote a certain way. It's the fact that they're loud. Those are the things that are important. So the money is important to get you in the door, but it's not going to convince somebody unless they want to, unless they believe in your argument. And the thing that sometimes people forget is we need to win the argument. Like people think, oh, this is so basic. It's common sense. How does this not happen? We have to win the argument. It's winning the war of ideas.
And when you say win the argument, you're getting in front of who you need to get in
Correct.
front of with some pretty basic common sense results or proposals. What else needs to be done? I'm still missing that
the gun
piece
owners.
of.
So there's a couple of things. One is in the federal government. So getting really into it, the Supreme Court has made a decision a few months ago.
That's right.
That's going to preclude a lot of gun laws in this country, and as a matter of fact, take away many of them.
Which is what
The Bruin case. So in other words, if we even pass, like as an example, an assault weapons ban in this country, it's doubtful that it'll stand. California, where we are, has a lot of laws on guns. If those laws get to the courts, some of them are going to get taken away. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's
the Supreme Court. Let's go back for just 1 second. The Supreme Court said you could carry concealed. That's what you're talking about.
But they also the impetus for the decision is, I mean, it sounds crazy, but is that the laws, whatever the law should have been in the 17 and 1800s. So in other words, the Fifth Circuit Court a couple of weeks ago said if you have a domestic violence restraining order, you can get a gun. And the reason for that is there were no domestic violence restraining orders in the 1700s because domestic violence was legal. So this is what's going on. Yes.
Wow.
So that's where the courts are right now. So it's important for people to understand that the ways that we talked about gun issues a few months ago are no longer the ways that we could talk about them now. Things have changed at the courts.
Wow.
A lot of laws are going to be getting overturned by the courts over the next few years. We're in a different place than we were a little bit ago.
What I think, which brings up the point of every state seems to do their own thing. So even though you mentioned earlier background checks, universal background checks, every state,
does
I can't even begin to go. Right. California's supposed to have the most stringent gun laws, right? Yes. Yet we have some of the most mass shootings. Right?
So, well, as a overall...
for the most deaths.
We have much less a percentage of gun deaths than Texas or Mississippi, for example, by a lot. Mm-hmm. So California that way is much safer in terms of gun issues because of many of those laws that you're talking about. But the way that the laws work now is, but you're asking what else we could do on gun issues. We're meeting with individual states, which is where the action's going to be over the next couple of years, to talk about what we could do. So, for example, Michigan will vote on Thursday on a bunch of new gun laws. Michigan State, you saw what happened. Yeah. And just to give you a further example, the person who committed the mass shooting in Michigan State the other day had a felony on guns knocked down to a misdemeanor. If our thing was law, he wouldn't have been able to get any guns.
Okay.
Right? But that's what's happening out states that are working on the issue more than the federal government, because the federal government Republican House is not going to do it right now.
Okay.
So in these individual states, yes. So Chicago, for example, everybody talks about all these murders in Chicago. About a third of the guns that go into Illinois come from Indiana, which has a much less stringent gun situation than Illinois does. We're in California. If you want to take a gun from Arizona to California, no one's stopping you. There's no state border. It's not like going from Mexico to Arizona.
Right.
You could just drive right in with your gun. And when we saw two recent big shootings in California, one of them, because the laws had changed, they didn't require a person to turn in their assault weapon. So that person may have had that gun for 25 years or however long it was. So the difference in state laws matters a lot, because without that uniformity, there's no way to enforce those laws in a state.
And so now you can come across state lines.
Sure.
Nevada has a different rule than California does. 97% with what you're working on will have more. This will be uniform.
So that's what we would suggest. Now, I'm not naive. Not every state. And
that sounds like a huge boulder to move.
So you can't. Texas is not doing anything on this, right? So, but what do you give gun owners back? So I would say is you would allow concealed carry in every state. Mm-hmm. So gun owners right now are furious because if you live in Virginia, you can't take your gun to D.C. or probably Maryland, right? If you walk around with that gun in Maryland or D.C., you're going to get arrested. But you can in Virginia. So what are we giving gun owners back? So if they have permits and they're legally able to, that's what we'd be giving them back, is statewide uniformity of laws, reciprocity. What we want people to do is the basics in these states to have these state permits, these gun permits with the state background checks. It's not going to happen in every state. We'd be fortunate if it happens in any state. We got to start to work on it one step at a time. There's no perfect solution to any of these problems.
And now talk about the different types of weapons that are out there. Right? Is what you're suggesting all the weapons that are out there? We've got assault rifles.
So when you say assault rifles, let me ask you a question. I'll put you on the spot. How many deaths? So assault weapons, the president of the State of the Union. People should know that I used to work for this president when he was in the Senate.
That's right. You were. But let's talk for a second. What'd you do for him?
I was a speechwriter.
Okay.
And he talked about the assault weapons ban. He favors an assault weapons ban. Of the 45,000 deaths a year with a gun, what percentage are with an assault weapon? Of the 20,000 homicides.
I'm just going to throw a number out there. 20%?
Okay. So maybe 1% overall and 3% on homicides.
Okay.
So I'm
way off.
Well, we just met with a congressional office the other day, and you're much closer.
Really?
The person said that people are coming in, she just assumed it was 40%. It's not. So on homicides, it's 3%, and then no one's committing suicide with an assault weapon. As a matter of fact, I did see somebody committed suicide with an assault weapon where they shot themselves the other day. They were in a bathroom. It went through the bathroom into the store that they were in. No one is really committing suicide with an assault weapon. So that's the vast majority. And then homicides, it's very few of the total.
So there's
that doesn't
no
mean
focus.
They're not scary.
Are you saying that you don't focus on this?
We don't focus on it because there's 34% support amongst gun owners, 49% support amongst all Americans. So less than 50% of Americans support an assault weapons ban and won't be supported by the courts or Congress.
Okay.
So for us to concentrate on it, I understand that people do, but Congress doesn't support it, the courts won't support it, the American people don't support it.
Okay. What can we do? Just the average person. What can they do?
It sounds cliche, but the best thing for people to do is really to contact legislators. And the most important thing is usually your own legislator, but your legislator might be somebody who really favors all of these things already. It's crude, but you have to get the people elected that represent your values, right? And so that often means knocking on doors. It may not mean in your district. It means giving money if you can give money. And if you can't give money, maybe you can knock on doors or make phone calls, things like that. Getting those people elected is the number one thing. So when we see people who don't represent your point of view, whoever you might be, there are some people who may not vote the way that you want them to, but they have just as much of a right to be there as you do. And this is the system that we have set up. So in order to defeat them and get people elected, you've got to win. Just like winning the argument, you have to win at the ballot box. And that's the most effective way. Make those phone calls. Even when it's not election time, make those phone calls to members of Congress saying, this is what I favor. They need to hear from people. They are moved by hearing from people.
You're doing some work between the entertainment industry and politicians. Mm-hmm. Any of that include 97%?
So it doesn't really. These are separate things for the most part, because there are other kinds of things that I work on as well.
You have time for other things.
Yeah, but so your audience knows, like next month we'll go meet with that congressional gun violence group in person and present to the 150, 170 people, members of Congress. We'll present to them in person next month. As an example of what we do, we're presenting to one of the states Thursday morning on this roadmap. And so we're on the road basically now presenting on the entertainment industry group. So the situation with that is in 2017, somebody from the Democratic National Committee asked me to put together a group that would work on messaging for the Democratic Party. Mm-hmm. So this wasn't a fundraising group. So very often when people are asked to help the Democratic National Committee, it's for money. And so this was not that. So I was able to put together a group at a very high level of actors and writers and producers that worked on messaging, and we did it. And it went really, really, really well. 2018, the Democrats did very well in Congress. And then in 2020, as a former Biden employee, I contacted somebody at the DNC again. And I said, it was very funny. I said, we want to do something again. And she said, send me a list of people you're talking about. So I sent her a list.
Of entertainment people.
And she said, okay, you're doing a weekly meeting between the Biden campaign and
That's not what you were suggesting?
No. And the meeting's every Monday, and this is what's happening. And so our first meeting was with Tony Blinken, who's now the Secretary of State, and Valerie Biden, who's Joe Biden's sister, and this entertainment group. Somebody in the entertainment group said there are more Academy Award winners in our meeting than at the Academy Awards. And it's very interesting. So what we do is people work for free on whatever they choose to work for. So there are about 200 and something people in the group. We do Zooms every month. It was every week during the campaign. Usually 35, 40 people show up on a Zoom because it's the middle of the day on a Friday. And what we do is we bring on newsmakers, politicians it could be journalists who come on and they talk to the group off the record. Everything's very off the record.
Okay. Thanks for talking to us about it. Yeah.
This is right.
I won't go too deep.
Well, reporters always say, could I come in and listen in and then report?
Yeah.
And we say absolutely
no.
not, because people want to be able to be stupid.
Yeah.
Is what I would say.
Is that what happens?
Well, you want to say something dumb and not have like it be in the New York Times the next day. And I'll tell you what happened where it went wrong. But what we do is, so for example, we had on Center for Reproductive Rights, which was doing the Supreme Court abortion case a year ago or whenever it was. They were the ones at the Supreme Court. They asked for help on messaging. We have the top writers on earth, and they help with messaging. That's an example.
Writers, meaning they're entertainment industry people.
Screenwriters, TV writers, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Biden administration says we need help on a certain issue. We give them the top people to help on that issue. There are lots of these types of things where, in Michigan, a group of us went on the bus with Gretchen Whitmer right before the election and traveled with her. Ruben Gallego's running for Senate in Arizona. We make a ton of introductions for him for his Senate race. All voluntary. People do Instagram lives. They do, in other words, some person with a big following of a couple million people will interview somebody in the political world, and they'll that's the audience for that is unbelievable. Like, let's use that as an example. I'm not saying she does this all the time, but Alyssa Milano has almost 4 million Twitter followers, right? Yeah. And she has a very loyal group of people. Some of them agree with her. Some of them do not agree with her at all. And so I'll tell you that one time a political figure said to me, can you ask Alyssa Milano to say something nice about me on Twitter? And so I called Alyssa and I said, can you say that? She likes the guy. I mean, she knows the guy. And she said, sure, I'll say something nice. I'll say it at 1 o'clock tomorrow, which is the prime time for my audience. And thousands of responses. And some of them are like, I can't believe you like that guy. He's a jerk. And some of them are, oh, thank you for saying this. I didn't realize he's such a good guy. I'm not going to say who the guy is. But she has a huge audience. I remember this person's not in our group. There's a woman. She lives in Beverly Hills. She's an influencer. I didn't know who she is. So I'm at a political fundraiser.
Wait, would you say you didn't know who she was?
I don't know who she is.
Oh, okay.
I'm at a fundraiser for a congressman at this woman's house, her mom. And everybody's surrounding this 20-year-old girl. And so I said, what's your thing? And she says, I have a TikTok account and Instagram account. And I have all these followers. Yeah. And all I do is write about politics and talk about politics.
Who is it?
Let me just say, so I call my kids.
Okay.
I said, do you know who this is? Oh, yeah, we follow her on TikTok. Does she write about politics? There are like 300 bikini pictures and one interview with Pete Buttigieg.
Oh.
But she has millions of followers.
Who is it?
What's her name?
Yeah.
Zilber is her last name, I think.
All right.
But she's great, right? She did one with Jen Psaki more recently, the former White House press secretary, who's also come on our Zooms. Anyway, so what the point is, though, that people who have big followings now have as much influence as media companies. Right. And so that's changed, right? In the last few years, this has been a huge change. It's sort of democratized.
So you're saying the journalists don't need to come when the journalist asks. No. You say, what do I need to?
That's true because it's now these people. Some of whom Helen Hunt has 1 million followers on Instagram. Right. If Helen Hunt decides, now she's preaching to a choir very often, but if Helen Hunt interviews one of these people who works for the Biden campaign or the administration, it's a big deal. It becomes a big deal. If she talks to Lucy McBath, who's a congressman from Georgia, it increases the number of people who are paying attention to Lucy McBath. And it may seem silly, but this is really the way that communication is now. So our group does a lot of that kind of stuff. During the Biden campaign, we would do things called celebrity Zoom bombs. Did you hear about this?
No, what is this?
So it's amazing what people do for free, but the producers of Parks and Rec would do this thing that I would do with them. And we would get on, everything was by Zoom. This was the height of COVID. And let's say the campaign in Pennsylvania, all the campaign workers would be on a Zoom and they'd be talking about what they're doing that day. And then Justin Timberlake would show up in the middle of their Zoom and they'd lose their minds because all of a sudden Justin Timberlake is on and he'd be thanking them. Right. And we had Mark Hamill come on from songs. and I think it was Wisconsin maybe. And the guy, one of the people, has a Star Wars poster right over his head. Now Mark Hamill's on his Zoom, thanking him for his work, and he's like, "Oh my gosh!" And then the campaign, we'd cut it, and then the campaign would put it on their website. We would do these phone banking things where we get a reunion of a show called like Once Upon a Time, and so instead of having 150 phone bankers, you have 350 phone bankers. And I remember looking once at one of these phone banks, and in the middle of it, not saying anything, not doing it, was Don Johnson. Making phone calls, like just sitting there making phone calls on the Zoom. But you do these types of things, and it's not, you have to be very careful about where celebrities are used. You don't take them, the celebrities don't need to go anywhere and tell people what to do. Yeah. This is what I would say. What they can be helpful on is getting out the vote, knocking on doors. That's a great use of people's time. Helping with fundraising events. You do not want entertainment people generally, unless they're really preaching to the choir, to tell people this is what you have to do. You shouldn't do that. You don't want them making silly videos, things like that. That happens way too often, where people are just excited to get a celebrity and the advice is bad and the video is bad. You want to make sure that you're using people properly. You're using them. Yeah. Right? So let's say, for example, there's an event in Michigan. They don't have a headliner, but there's a celebrity who's from Michigan who could headline that event, and now you're raising twice as much money. That's where you want to do these types of things. So that's the kind of thing. So using Ruben Gallego as an example, running for Senate in Arizona, he's coming in on Thursday, and he'll have lunch with like 25 people, and then he goes to an event at some celebrity's house where he'll raise a decent amount of money. It's early in the campaign. But they are able to do that because the entertainment person is hosting the events, and that draws more people to the events. So that's where the entertainment stuff becomes useful. The other thing is that with these writers, there's a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff that your audience doesn't know about, but neither does 99.99% of America, where some top-level writers communicate with members of Congress about messaging and say, here's the way to phrase this, and we work together to make sure that the messaging is being heard. Doesn't mean you have to use it. If it is used very often.
And you're making that connection. You're helping them make those connections.
So sometimes some of these people have the connections themselves because they've done this for a while. And sometimes they do not. So I'll just say at a very, 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 very high level, recently met with a couple of people, and there's a back and forth on communications between four of us that goes on once every 2 weeks to talk about things that should be said. And then I see that somewhere else.
Oh. You want to elaborate on that?
I do not.
All right. Back us up into, how did you ever get involved in that? I mean, how did you ever get into this work? And while you're answering that question, I'm going to let the dog in again, who now wants to come back and sit on your lap. How did you get into this work?
Well, I started out here. My first job was, while I was still in school, was working for a congressman who, of course, went to jail. And so that was the end of that job. So I was at a wedding in Washington, my friend Nicole's wedding, and there was a movie producer at the wedding who said, I didn't know what I was going to do. I was lost for like 6 months.
How old were you then?
22, maybe? 23?
Oh, wow. Okay.
I don't know.
And you were lost?
I didn't know what I was going to do.
Yeah, okay.
So, and it wasn't like that ambitious or bright. And
I don't believe that for a second.
I swear. Trust me. And this producer said, I'm producing a movie. Why don't you come apprentice with me on this movie? What? I mean, she had made a famous movie, which was cool.
Wait, but how did she make that? She just looked at you and...
We sat at breakfast. Yeah. She had produced the movie Cool Runnings. You remember that movie about the Jamaican bobsled team? Yes. So she said, I'm doing another movie. I've got this movie. Why don't you come be my apprentice on the movie? That's what she says at breakfast. Okay.
And you said, I have other plans.
I had nothing to do. I took my grandfather's Maxima out to L.A. with like hefty bags of clothes.
And this is in New York, New Jersey?
I was in New York. This was a wedding in D.C. My friend Nicole was marrying Hillary Clinton's brother. Oh. So we were at that wedding. Okay. And Tony. And so I drive out.
Are they still married?
No.
Okay.
He passed away, but they got divorced 20 years ago.
Okay.
And drive out to L.A. So it's this woman, Susan, and Dawn Steele. Dawn was very famously the first female studio head. She ran Paramount. Okay. So I get out here. I don't know anything. Now, I've worked in a congressional office. That's about it. Except for...
As like an intern or as like an hourly...
As a legislative staffer.
Okay.
I started as an intern. Okay. But aside from that, I was a waiter before that. Like, I don't know anything about anything. Yeah. So the first day, Dawn's assistant, I didn't know what I was in for. I was not apprenticing. I was getting the crap kicked out of me.
What do you mean?
It was like, run to me when I call your name, peel my orange. I swear.
Welcome to Hollywood,
Oh my God. And
Matt
this woman,
Littman.
by the way, I want your audience to know, had the worst body odor on earth. And the other assistants would pour perfume on her floor of her office to make sure, because the smell was so bad from, I swear to God. She's dead, so I don't mind
I was
saying.
going to say, is this woman still alive?
No.
Because she's going to come back and get
dead.
you.
So it was like she was screaming at me. So like 4 or 5 days in, Dawn asked, who I didn't work with, asks me to type up a memo. So I say to Dawn's assistant, what's the format for typing a memo? And Dawn says, you're fired. I'm here for literally like 4 or 5 days. So I go home.
And
to
were
my
you really
friend's apartment.
fired?
Yeah. So I go to my friend's apartment. And
Have you moved to LA? You
yeah,
packed your car?
I'm staying in a friend's apartment.
Okay.
And 5 days later, I get a call from Susan, who was really my boss. And she says, what are you doing? I said, what do you mean, what am I doing? She says, where are you? I said, I'm at my friend's apartment. She says, come back to work. I said, you guys fired me 4 days ago. She says, no, we do that all the time. Come on back. So I go back. Now, the thing that your audience should know is when I came to LA, I was in a basketball game. And I got into this basketball game.
Like just a pickup game?
Yes.
Okay.
But when I was in D.C., there was at that same wedding, there was a guy who I knew was a famous writer. And I knew he had a basketball game in LA. And I knew, because of that I had breakfast with this woman, that I might be coming out to LA. So I kind of befriended him a little bit.
Yeah.
And he invited me into this very exclusive basketball game in LA. Celebrities, writers, like the whole thing. You had to be invited the day of the game. The game was twice a week. So in other words, I could be playing in this game for 10 years. And unless you got the call that day, you don't show up. Right?
What is that all about?
This is this guy's game. This was a very exclusive thing.
He decided who was in the game.
He decides who's in the game every time. Wednesdays and Saturdays, he decides who's in the game. So I met that guy, and he knew I was working for this woman. He wanted to save me from working for this woman. So I want to be a writer. Not that I know anything about it, by the way.
Oh, wait. How did you decide you wanted to be a writer? I didn't.
This guy was a writer.
Oh, okay.
So that's all these people are writers. Well, that sounds great.
Oh, yeah, I'll
These
do
schmucks
that.
can write. Why can't I write? They're stupid. So I
I've drafted a few emails. Well,
Right.
actually, there were no emails then.
This is like mid to late
Like
90s.
I've written a thank you note.
So I say to the guy, I want to be a writer, which is a very difficult thing to say to this guy, very intimidating figure. And he says, send me a script of the show Friends. I swear this is what happened.
This is the basketball guy.
Yeah.
Okay.
I hadn't seen Friends. So I write a script. I ask somebody who's on the show, and I send it to them.
What do you mean you write a script? Did you know the format?
Yes. I can figure out the format.
Okay.
So
You
I send
just
this guy this
figured
thing.
out the format?
Well, you can look up what a TV script looks like,
Okay.
and it's like 40 pages long. and
Okay.
it's all that.
Okay.
So I send it to me. I get back a messenger thing. Like this is before email.
Yeah. Like a fax.
Right.
A telegram.
Right, exactly.
What were those things
so
called?
he sends it back to me and he says, really funny stuff, not emotional enough for me, can't hire you. Now, the connection was, though, Alita, I was trying to be a writer's assistant. I wasn't ready to, I knew I couldn't write for this guy. So I said to somebody, this guy, he's not even hired. What do you have to do to be a writer's assistant? And the person said, he's not listening to you. He's not paying any attention to what you said. You have to now call him back and tell him, I'm not trying to write for you right now. So I call him back, which is very tough. And I say, Gary, I want to be a writer's assistant on your show. He says, great, you're hired. This is how I got started. And so I was a writer.
Was this before you even got into the basketball game? Or
I was in the game.
You were in the game.
The game is a very interesting, like Woody Harrelson played in the game, for example. A bunch of people played in that game. So
this is, you show up, you come to LA, you go to one of the games.
No, one person.
Okay, but you go to the game.
Yeah.
And after how many games does he say, send me the script?
So that's a good question. Must have been here for probably 6 months or so.
And you're still working.
For this woman.
Yeah. Okay.
So he hires me, and then I became a writer.
And you quit the other job?
Oh, God, yes.
Oh my God. Couldn't wait.
So then Dawn Steele died of a brain aneurysm.
Oh, geez.
And Susan died during back surgery.
Oh.
Terrible.
Wow.
Crazy stuff. So I became a writer. When I was a writer, I met somebody who was a speechwriter, and she was living in Santa Monica on the beach in D.C. And I said, as a speechwriter, because TV writing is a very good way to make a living if you're writing and being paid for it, but it could be very scary. And I had seen some of the guys that I was playing ball with. They had been writers. They were super smart, great, but they were on like their 9th careers, and I was very nervous.
Right. Because you never know, right? You could have a show and
you
then
could
not
have a show.
have a show.
The show goes for 2 months.
Yeah.
It ends.
Yeah.
You're out of a job.
Yeah.
So, and I saw these guys like,
this is Hollywood. This
right.
is, I mean, and
it's
people
not
do
like
this.
another business
Yeah.
where
But
you work your way up.
Right.
It's not like that.
But coming from the East Coast, and I'm from the East Coast as well,
Right.
where it's a lot more traditional, the work
Right.
is when you get to LA and you start seeing people at noon, like in the coffee shop or
Right.
working out,
Right.
you're like, what? Who
Well,
does
I
that?
always say in our neighborhood where we live now, we know which writers are working, which aren't by the lawns.
Right. Oh, really?
Because if the lawns are being mowed, that means they're paying their gardener. And if they're not being mowed, they can't pay their gardener.
Yeah.
They're not working.
Yeah, yeah. So now we know this rhythm living in LA, but at the time you're thinking, how am I going to do
This
this?
is horrible.
Yeah.
And I was having an okay time.
Yeah.
So I got offered a job writing a speech. I guess first I got offered a job writing a speech before I met this woman. And because the person knew that I worked in politics at some point and then was working as a writer. So they asked me to write a speech for an elected official. And I wrote a speech, no experience. It took me 4 days. If I wrote that now, it'd probably take me 5 minutes. Handed in, I think I'll never speak to these people again. And they offered me a job.
Really?
Really? That's where I met my wife, by the way. I was at this office. And so I started writing speeches, and then I started a speech writing business. This is a short version of the story.
Okay.
Not easy to do from LA because most big businesses are not in LA. Mm-hmm. Most speech writing is New York,
So
DC.
you're getting hired for what types of speech
So
writing?
corporate speech writing.
Okay.
I was working for Biden, got lucky and got the job with Biden. A lot of celebrity stuff, some good, some absolutely god-awful celebrity stuff, but some good celebrity stuff. I mentioned Alyssa before. She was terrific. Hilary Swank, I did some work for. Terrific. The great, not great, but great at the time, Kevin Spacey. Mm-hmm. I did a speech for Kevin Spacey that he gave to IBM in front of 10,000 people. And this was when House of Cards was starting.
Oh, wow.
So Kevin Spacey considered himself the most knowledgeable person about the future of entertainment because he had studied all of this stuff and saw where it was going. So he would get hired, and companies would pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for this, to speak at these corporate events and talk about the future of entertainment. And he cursed every other sentence. So remember IBM.
Did you write that in?
I did. So IBM writes back to me and says, we can't do this. You can't say fuck every paragraph. And he says to them, if you take anything out of this speech, I'm not showing up. So he gave it, and it's on, I've seen it on YouTube. But there's a lot of that. Corporate is what you want to do when you're a speechwriter because it's consistent. And
So you write, hold on, pause for a second. You write for Joe Biden.
So I did Joe Biden. So what happened was I knew Joe Biden's chief of staff, who's a friend of mine. I met with Joe Biden at the Beverly Hilton, and one of his longtime aides, Larry Rasky, who passed away a couple of years ago. And I met Joe, like our buddies. I met Biden. And
What did you
Larry
call
Rasky.
him? What did you call him? Did you say,
Well, he
hey,
was Senator
Joe?
Biden at that time.
Senator Biden.
I'm definitely not calling him Joe.
You don't call him
No,
Joe.
and it's an interesting thing that you say that because a lot of people feel familiar with elected officials.
Yeah.
And I've had to correct them because you don't, like when you see an elected official and you may be friendly with them, you're in front of people, you have to say congressman, congresswoman. You don't say Molly.
Yeah.
Right, because it's not respectful. And also, so your audience says you call somebody by their last best title.
So you meet with Senator Biden at the time.
At the Beverly Hilton.
Just the two of you?
And this guy, Larry.
And how does
And
that
he
go?
hires me.
He
He's
hires
a speechwriter. Very quickly.
Senator Biden hires you.
And then
You get hired a lot. They just meet you and hire you.
And then they fired me.
Oh.
And then, so Biden, it was great because, and let me say, I'm pretty honest about the fact that I worked for some people who were terrible.
Yeah.
But it was great. It was an incredible experience because he was going to run for president. And when you're running for president, usually a person has
Well, what year is this about?
2006, 7.
Okay.
A person has a bunch of speechwriters, more than one. There's more than one person. There wasn't. And so they would do
Just
things.
you?
Yes. So things like this would happen where they'd call me and they'd say, all right, on Thursday, Biden needs to give a speech on the history of education in America. What? I don't know. What do I know about that? So you're in a panic. So, you contact these staffers who work for him and whoever you can. You do the best you can. The first speech, I remember, the first big speech I wrote for him was at the National Press Club. So a guy like Biden's been around for 40 years, right? At that time, even. How do you know what to say? You can't know what he knows. It's impossible. Plus, you have to go through his whole crew of people, one of whom is the Secretary of State now, Tony Blinken.
What do you mean go through them?
So when I write a big speech for a guy for Biden specifically, if it's a big speech, they get it first. And they'll critique it before you even get back to Biden. Then I remember doing his first campaign type speech in Iowa. And let's say it's 10 pages long. So a speech is a minute a page, right? And he's giving it to some labor conference. And he goes out and he gives it. And at the beginning, I had a quote from Abe Lincoln. And he gives the speech, and the guy who worked for him, the great Mark Doyle, calls me and says, "Great job on the speech." He used the Lincoln quote, and he never uses the quotes that speechwriters give him. I said, "That's great." And but about the rest of the speech, he said he didn't use one word of the rest of the speech. And that was considered a great job, right? And what I realized was, for a guy like that, these guys, they give so many speeches. And you're basically saying, here's where you are.
Yeah.
This is your audience. And then they may go off on their own.
And was that usually what he did? Very
often.
Wow.
I remember going to something at like 7 in the morning in one of these states, maybe it was Iowa, where he started talking about secret meetings that he had in the Palestinian territories. Well, how the hell do I know? I don't know about your No, I don't know about his secret meetings. The secrets. So he starts talking about it. I'm like, oh, well, I didn't know about that one. And he's had a history with all the world leaders and all these sorts of things. And I went on the plane with him a few times around Iowa, which, you're on these, by the way, his campaign didn't have money. You're on a rickety plane.
Yeah.
My face is white.
Yeah.
I think we're going to die.
Right.
And he's like, don't worry, it's fine. I've done this a million times.
So what was he like?
He was great.
He was great. What does great mean?
So great meaning like super smart, super nice, super warm. The family, I thought these people were terrific. And I've been around a lot of political families.
Yeah.
Like, for example, when I flew into one state, some person picks me up at the airport, takes me to the debate that's happening, find out that she's Biden's niece. Like, never says anything, totally down to earth. Mm-hmm. And he's a hardworking guy. And I'm not saying, listen, if you're in Congress or the president, you're not the same as everybody else. You could be average Joe, but you're not, because you've been doing this for a long time. People have been kissing your ass for a long time. You think you're smarter than everybody else, and you might be.
And you're a little bit of a celebrity.
Yeah. So you don't expect that person to be the same. You just want him to be kind of like a nice guy or a woman or whatever it might be. And honestly, it was a great experience. But then he got shellacked immediately and the campaign was done. And then I went on to continue the speechwriting stuff for a while. Your audience may find this interesting. There are a couple of very well-known crisis communications guys. Chris Lehane, who's considered the master, and Mark Fabiani, who used to be Bill Clinton's lawyer. They had their own firm. They didn't do lobbying. So they called me one day, I knew politicians. This is how I got into this whole thing. They were working for the Spanos family. Spanos owned the Chargers football team. Spanos needed a freeway expanded in Northern California because not only do they own a football team, they almost own the town of Stockton, California, which is the unemployment capital of America.
Of course.
Is anybody from Stockton listening? Sorry, it's a beautiful town. And they wanted the freeway expanded to get more traffic to the port, which would increase commerce in their town. And I had to go through the Senate. So they hired me to help do that. It worked very well. We had a very good time, and that's how I started.
And did they get the freeway?
No.
Oh.
So our job was to get it to the point where the main person in the United States Senate said yes. We could not get the House to go along.
Okay.
But that was our job. We did our job.
So that begins
this thing.
Okay.
Yes.
What's the most difficult project you'd say you've been on? I mean, now we're in gun reform. Is that the right way, by the way, to refer to it? Gun reform, gun
safety, things like that. Is what I say. Right. Good. Yeah.
That's pretty tough.
They're tougher. There has been much tougher. This is a tough one. To get it done is tough.
Much tougher?
So there was a company that I worked for where they had a tax issue. And the tax issue, by the way, I'm not a CPA. When you work on these types of issues.
But you said you were so smart.
I didn't. You did. When you work on these issues, it's all, the advocacy is the same, right? In other words, you're going in, you're explaining something quickly, and you're getting out. Okay. And you want to leave it so that they understand what you're saying, and maybe they like you a little bit, right? So it doesn't matter what the issue is necessarily, because it's all the same in terms of you're explaining it, and that's it, right? You got to get the meeting. That's the key.
Okay.
So on the tax issue, get in the room. The tax issue, the company itself, if this thing got into legislation, would have cost the company $400 million, right? So the whole thing was keep this out of legislation. This was just in 2020, I think, was when this was really happening. If it gets in the legislation, you're dead. Mm-hmm. It gets in the legislation.
Oh, boy.
So a congressman who's in the district of a very big company, much bigger than ours, we didn't know. We had a lot of people who should have known. All of a sudden, it's in there, and it's in the stimulus package of 2020 during COVID. I think this is when it was. Now, that will kill the company. That won't kill them, but it's going to cost a lot of money. How do we get that out? That was the most difficult thing. We did it.
And you got it out.
We did.
Wow.
Twice. Twice.
Because once wasn't good enough.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's that kind of thing where it's a crisis and everybody is hair on fire.
Yeah. How long did that take?
Weeks. Because it's not even like, it's not the length of time. So when somebody hires you to do government affairs, they're not paying you to work hourly. They're paying you to work overall and for your contacts, right? So you could be in a crisis and then you could have nothing to do for 6 months.
Yeah. Do you get tired?
No.
Really?
Yeah. No.
Do you get frustrated?
Oh, it's incredibly frustrating. It's also frustrating for me, Alita, because I'm in a different situation because I live in California. So if I were living in D.C., I'd probably be doing 10 times the stuff I'm doing, but I opt to live here, which is, no one does that. Right?
So when you say frustrating, you're saying frustrating because
I'm missing out on some work. So I could have worked for Biden in the administration, for example.
Yeah.
I was offered a seat at the table in the administration, which I can't
Wow.
do.
Wow.
Kids are in school, wife works, parents moved here, my wife's sister moved here. We can't do it. So that part of it is frustrating. That part that's agitating. But the stuff that I do get to do generally is exciting. I meet incredible people.
Yeah, you sound like you do.
I'm shocked when anybody's listening to me.
Yeah.
How
do you get people to listen to you? That's part of that. That goes back to your communication style. Now, anyone who's listening to this will completely understand why you get, people to agree with you. You are an incredible communicator.
I appreciate it.
What do you attribute that to?
I don't know. Listen, I go in and I talk to people like they're people, and I try to explain things. So the speechwriter part of it is super helpful. In other words, if you're a speechwriter, you know when people are paying attention and when they're not, right? You could look at the audience and see their eyes glazing over. So even when I'm doing a TV appearance, I'm looking at that anchor if I'm able to.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you don't even see the anchor if you're doing it by Zoom. And you could see when they're stopping or when they're ready to ask the next question. You get it, right? Yeah. And so when you're in with people, meeting with people specifically, you have a very limited period of time. If you're saying something that's boring, and the person is like their eyes are glazing over.
But where do you get that from? Where do you think that comes from?
Well, I think it's from experience.
Yeah.
I really do. I think it's from the experience of doing the speech writing stuff and paying attention to how people talk and what people listen to. And so, when I just went in, for example, with other people into some of these meetings. And I can tell you that when we left the meeting, we said to one of them, stop saying this. Say this.
Yeah.
Because if you say this, that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Right? You're in there for 15 minutes. Then you're out. So you got to, in those 15 minutes, has to be everything you want to say has to be in those 15 minutes, or we're done.
Because they don't have the attention span for it.
They don't have it. When you're meeting with congressional staff or a member of Congress, let's assume they have 18 other meetings that day.
Yeah.
Plus committee hearings. So are they going to remember what you told them? Well, that's pretty tough. So a lot of people will think, when I go to D.C., I want to meet with Congressman blah, blah, blah. I don't. Because that congressman has so many meetings, they don't care.
What do you mean you don't want to meet with them?
I don't want to meet with him. I want to meet the staff.
Okay.
It's the staff that's really getting the work done.
And then they'll brief him later.
They'll brief him later and say this should be a priority.
Okay.
And then if I need to meet with that member of Congress, that's another story. Now, a question would be, why do members of Congress pay attention? That's a good question. I'm asking.
Thank you, by the way.
So, and the reason is because...
Can you fill in when I'm on vacation?
The reason for this is because it's not that they think I'm a nice guy or whatever. Maybe they do. I always say about members of Congress, they're not my friends. We have relationships, right? So they're not like, there's some members of Congress that I think are absolutely fantastic. But if I drop dead tomorrow, really truthfully, they won't give a shit.
Yeah, they're not
right?
coming.
But I know entertainment people who could help them. I know about messaging, which could help them. So I'm giving something to them.
Yeah. Okay.
So when I get, I could text members of Congress. I could text right now somebody and say, this is what I would say about X, and they'll listen. That's why they're paying attention. I could say to them...
Because you're offering them good information.
I'm offering them stuff, and I'm not asking for anything.
But you will.
Well, the things that I'm asking for are not controversial. In other words, if I were going in and saying, I think more people should smoke cigarettes, well, then they may not pay attention to me, right? But generally speaking, I'm giving them something that they like, that they want. So even if I'm working on a tax issue or whatever it might be, they're going to probably listen to me because not just because they might like me personally, but they know that I'm offering something else to them. So I'm not offering.
Good technique.
Well, I'm not offering $1 bazillion.
Right.
Right? I don't have the money to give them. But what I do sometimes do, Alita, is I'll go to D.C. and I'll arrange a dinner. And the dinner will be for like 4 members of Congress and 15 people who are lobbyists, speechwriters, et cetera, for the members of Congress. It's great. I get to talk to these speechwriters. Maybe I'll use one. This person does lobbying for a tech company. Maybe we'll meet with them. For the lobbyists and the speechwriters, this is great. All I'm paying for is my own dinner. You can't pay. Does the audience know that you can't pay for a member of Congress's meal?
You can't buy them dinner.
Unless they're standing up.
What?
That's true. It's the law is that you could serve them an appetizer or hors d'oeuvre and they have to be standing up for it.
Oh, cocktail?
Yeah.
A cocktail too.
I don't know if a cocktail counts.
Yeah, maybe not.
I'm
Alcohol?
not sure. So that ended the whole like go play golf and have 3 drinks kind of thing.
Right, yes.
So they're paying for themselves, we're paying for ourselves. And I remember one time we did it and this congressman took us he was like drunk, and took us on a tour of the Capitol like midnight and showed us like all this secret stuff. But it's like I'm giving them something, they're giving me something, right? It doesn't cost anybody anything. So it's a lot of that kind of stuff. What am I giving you that doesn't cost a dime? So let's use another example, which is 16 members of the entertainment industry and a couple of influencers go to Michigan. What are we offering? We're offering these people do messaging. These people will knock on doors for you. These people will raise money for you. I'm not doing it.
Right. But you're bringing them the people.
I'm bringing them the people.
Yeah.
So now, if it's a good enough issue, I'll get my calls returned.
Yeah. So, which brings us full circle to 97% of you getting in front of them and giving them information that you want them to listen to. Correct. What are they getting?
So they're could be doing what their constituents want them to do. So even as an example, we met with somebody on the Republican side who had an A+ NRA rating. And when we came in, that guy was giving us a pretty hard time about
Well, why would he even take the meeting?
Because the former congressman asked for the meeting.
Okay.
And he was giving us a really hard time.
So he's kind of doing a favor.
I thought so.
Okay.
The congressman asked for the meeting. It's me, the guy from Tufts, the former congressman. And as we go through the meeting and he's giving us a hard time, he says, you know what? I didn't realize this about violent misdemeanors. I didn't know. He said, that's kind of a loophole that I didn't realize existed. So I am interested in hearing more about that. And that's a perfect example when we met with somebody on the Democratic side who said 40% of deaths are from assault weapons. She didn't know. She said her impression from all these organizations coming in was that it was 40%.
Interesting.
So we're giving them something, and what we're giving them is factual data. This is fact. Do what you want, but we're giving you this. You could do whatever you want with it, but this is fact. So we're educating them in a sense. And while all these people may be super smart or not or whatever it is, there is a space sometimes for somebody else to do things that brings in a different point of view. And my whole thing is we're here to help. Like that's the way I work generally. That's the way I work with the entertainment folks. We're not here to complain. We're here to help. We're here to provide you with this information. So you take that information, do what you want. Now, this is not the last study that we'll do. It's not the last survey we'll do. It's not the last polling we'll do. We'll keep doing it. But this is a way of people to have information that they may not be able to get otherwise. Where are they going to get this? So when the Senate was doing legislation in June on guns, our organization, which was very new, was being talked about in the House hearings by Eric Swalwell from Northern California and Lucy McBath from Georgia. That was the first time that was happening. And then in the Republican side, I'll tell your audience another secret in a second, John Cornyn, the senator from Texas, was surveying Republican gun owners to find out where they were in these issues. And then he, in fact, led on passing gun legislation because he saw where they were, which is where we thought they were.
So you provoked that, though?
We believe that we did.
Yeah.
Or we'd like to think that we did. I can't say for sure that we did. Another thing that we do, so
just take credit for it. Nobody's going to know.
The idea is really to take credit for it. So your audience knows every other month we do a secret meeting.
Secret meeting. 97% does a secret meeting.
Of both sides of the gun issue. We get everybody together. And
who's everybody?
I can't say that.
Oh,
that's the part I can't say.
That's the secret part?
Yes. So, and we talk about gun issues. And usually we have some professor.
How many people are in the secret 15. Meeting? 15 people in the secret meeting.
And we have a professor usually presents some research or data to the group. It's a way of getting
new research, new data. Okay.
Way of getting the conversation going. And the idea is to keep people talking in a civilized way. So when Congress was debating the issue in June, somebody from our group said, let's have an emergency meeting of the group, which was great.
Of the secret
group.
That's what you want. Of the secret group.
Yes.
Okay.
To talk about the potential legislation. In the group, we had the meeting. And in the meeting, the group came up with where everybody agrees. And we're able to convey that to the House and Senate negotiators and say, if you do this, everybody agrees on it. And that's where we come in. So part of our charge...
You left the biggest piece for the end of this.
Yeah. So part of our charge is
very
just
strategic.
Getting people to speak to each other about the issue, to understand that most of us really agree. Right? Most people are good people.
Yeah.
Most people agree on these issues, but we have to be able to talk about it in a civilized way.
Matt Littman, you are doing good work. What's next?
Well, just FYI, we're working on the homelessness issue as well. We met with the mayor of Los Angeles.
Of course you are. Of course you are.
This is through Adam and Stacy Miller, the philanthropists.
Is that the same as 97%?
Yes, it's all part of 1P, which means one planet. And the homelessness stuff is starting in a couple of weeks. Eventually we'll get to climate. But the gun stuff has really... The gun stuff was a lot of thankless labor for a while until it wasn't. And it really started to take off last June. And then the Washington Post did a big feature on us in September. And so that's when it really took off. So now people are listening, and that's the key. Okay,
they're listening, but what happens next? What are we following for this? Because you said earlier nothing's going to happen for a year and a half.
Federally. State-wise, we do believe that things are going to happen, and they're going to happen pretty quickly.
Okay.
So we're going to work on that. We'll work on more research. We're going to keep meeting with members of Congress and people on the state level. We expect to bring in more people, more followers, more people who will then be able to advocate for the things that we're talking about. In other words, gun owners will be advocating, we believe, for gun reforms. That's the key.
And we'll do this again?
Yep.
For sure.
Ready to do it, sure.
We got to do it again. The dogs will miss you. They need you to come back.
I'll be back.
All right. Thank you so much, Matt.
Thank you, Alita.